From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Beth Davis-Brown, and I'm a program coordinator in the Cooperative and Instructional Programs Division here at the Library of Congress. And by the way, I'm an archivist by marriage. I'm a librarian by training. So that's how I started going to SAA, because I was just going trips, the only way I could go on trips. The Cooperative and Instructional Programs is a long name for my division. So what I usually tell people what we do is we're basically internal and external training. We're the secretariat for the program for cooperative cataloging, and we were just discussing, we don't use the word collaborative cataloging, we say cooperative cataloging, because we are an international organization. You might have heard of a little change we made lately, implementing something called RDA, Resource Description and Access. And so we had 800 external partners that we trained, in addition to our 600 staff here at the Library of Congress that we needed to train. One of the things I enjoyed doing, was able to do, was I produced a series of webcast training, because we are no longer in the age where we can, send a trainer somewhere for a week and have them hang out and teach people in person. So we've developed a nice hybrid model of webcast lectures combined with quizzes, interactive bulletin boards, and then we will often finish up with a live webinar. So we're trying to address people's needs as much as we can through the web. And we do have an excellent facility here at the Library of Congress with the ITS Multimedia Group who's filming this session. So we've been lucky to be able to use them. We also did the training in Spanish. I wanted to let you know. We did the first go-around in English, and then we had some librarians from Latin America actually come up and do the training in Spanish that we've got on the web. And if anybody's interested in this aspect, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards about it. One of the other things I do here, since I am an archivist by marriage, is I'm co-chair of the Archives Forum of the Library of Congress. And this is an in-house group that's kind of a grassroots group that we requested the managers that we could start this, and they agreed. So we do a few things that you all might be interested in doing in your institution. We have monthly programs with speakers or panel discussions, mostly internal speakers, although sometimes we get people from the outside. We have two separate monthly lunchtime discussion groups. One's where we'll read an article and discuss, or another is where they meet with a lot of our IT colleagues, and Bert's active in that group, and some others of you are, where we'll have our content people and our IT people really talk together, which has been great. Another thing we've done is we've actually viewed a training webcast from SAA. So instead of just one person paying for it, SAA allows us to buy the webcast. We can get a room full of 50 or 60 people and watch the webcast together. And then people who are pursuing a certification or training can pay to take the test and get some continuing education credit. So that might be a good way in your institution to spread around some training dollars. The other final thing is I'm a co-chair of the host committee for next year's SAA annual meeting here in Washington. So I hope some of you guys can come for that. Well, I'm really honored to be asked by my American Folklife Center colleagues to introduce our next session on education and training. Cultural heritage archivists are often asked to give guidance and offer training for preserving, safeguarding, and providing access to ethnographic materials. This session will focus on case studies of archival training models, collaborations, and examples that have worked or have not, to encourage the development of coordinated training for the archival treatment of cultural heritage materials. Chairing our session today is Doug Boyd, and Doug directs the Louis B. Nunn Center for Oral History at the University of Kentucky Libraries, and he is a recognized leader regarding oral history, archives, and digital technologies. He recently managed a project called Oral History in the Digital Age, which was funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. This project established current best practices for collecting, curating, and disseminating oral histories, and Doug's also here to speak with the Smithsonian on Monday, luckily, while the government we know is still open. Doug currently leads the team that Envision Design is implementing an open source oral history metadata synchronizer, pronounced, is it OHMS? The OHMS system, which synchronizes text with audio and video online. He holds a PhD in folklore and ethnomusicology from Indiana University and previously served as the manager of the digital program for the University of Alabama Libraries, director of the Kentucky Oral History Commission, and senior archivist for the Oral History and Folklife collections at the Kentucky Historical Society. And I grew up in Tennessee, so I told Doug he's from the right part of the country. Please welcome our moderator, Doug Boyd, who will talk about re-envisioning best practices, exploring new models for archival education and training.
Thank you. Thank you. Notice, it did say the PhD in folklore, and then it said senior archivist. So I took a poll beforehand, and I've debated. I'm not going to reveal the identities of the speakers in terms of their archives or archivist status, but I'm going to tell you that we have at least one on the panel. So, my name is Doug Boyd. I direct an oral history center. It's an oral history center that's 40 years. I'm going to set my little clock here because I've seen Bert get mean. There. It's a large oral history center, relatively speaking. It's about, when you're not talking about the Library of Congress, we have about 9,000 interviews, over 9,000 interviews now, about 25,000 hours worth of material. Most of it's on audio cassette. We've been collecting and archiving it for 40 years, so we do a lot with digitization. We started with digitization quite early. We also don't, one thing you need to know, we don't commission all of our projects. So we mostly work with partnerships and community partners, scholars, community scholars, neighborhood associations, you name it. The Kentucky Distillers Association, which is our current project on the bourbon industry. We are all about creating those partnerships. We're talking all about collaboration. What comes with that is a great deal of training, a great deal of educating. And so I do, dozens of workshops each year. I do a lot of workshops through the Oral History Association and whatnot as well with digital technologies. I'm a firm believer in, knowing that not every interview should go online. Not every interview, some interviews should be restricted for a period of time, right? That being said, I don't think anybody does oral history with the intent of obscurity, right? Nobody does interviews with the hope that it sits on a shelf for 25 years to degrade and never be heard, right? We want individual stories, individual performers to be on the historical record someday, somehow. So I'm going to start off with a story talking about a recent reference request that we received at the Nunn Center. We get a lot of reference requests now that we have an online catalog from all over the world. This one came from Italy, a small town called Tremensuoli. He's a novelist, and he's writing a book set during World War II in the small town of Tremensuoli. Am I saying that right? Tremensuoli? We have an Italian here on the panel. Tremensuoli was the site of a major World War II battle in 1944. He's writing a novel set during this battle. We had an interview in our collection with Marshall Webb, and Marshall Webb was a veteran from Campbellsville, Kentucky, who fought in the battle. Right, mission accomplished. We connected a novelist looking for somebody who had firsthand experience and good information architecture, good metadata, usable interface, mission accomplished. We get requests like this all the time. Feels good, right? To finally be able to provide access globally to our oral history collections. But this researcher was interested in this interview not because he was interested in anyone exploring the Battle of Tremensuoli. He was interested in this man, Marshall Webb, from this small town in Kentucky. So we went back and forth, asked, in terms of correspondence, and as it turns out, I asked him, why are you particularly interested in Marshall Webb? Because on March 30th, 1944, Marshall Webb carved his name and date in a wall of an alleyway in stone in Tremensuoli, presumably during the battle, hopefully after. So he came to us for this 4-hour interview. He's able to link, harnessing the power of the internet, digital technologies. I want you to think about this for a moment. A carving on a stone wall. How many have carved their name in something, somewhere? You don't have to hold up your hand, but you know, right? It actually worked, right? Somebody is able to go from that carving to his 4-hour life story or World War II experience. It's phenomenal. It's incredible. I think that in addition to that, as was indicated in the introduction, we did develop a system called the Oral History Metadata Synchronizer. I prefer to call it OHMS. OHMS makes the audio and video searchable. So you can connect not only to an interview, but you connect to a moment in the audio of the interview with a textual search. So when this researcher searches Tremensuale, he's not only able to find the interview, he can connect to that moment when Marshall Webb begins to describe his first impressions of Tremensuale. And I think that's pretty awesome in terms of oral history. And I bring that up because I'm leading into talking about education and training with regard to, at least first, with this OHMS system. We developed OHMS 4 years ago, and initially it was designed for just transcription. You drop a transcript in, like a video game, you could sync up the transcript to the time code, you know, very efficiently and quickly, and with a text search, say, of the word bourbon, it would not only take you to the textual location, but it would take you to the corresponding audio or video location in the audio and the video player. So feeling pretty good about ourselves, going around saying, hey, look what we did. This is pretty cool, isn't it? And always getting 2 questions, you know, when's it going to be available for the rest of us? And I guess the second part is more of a comment. We can't afford to transcribe. So when the economy crashed, my endowment went under, I couldn't afford to transcribe. I couldn't actually afford to use my own system from that perspective. And so we added a new module, which is an indexing module. So on the archive side, you go in, you listen to an interview, and in real time, you tag the moments with a title, keywords and subjects, synopses. You can write a synopsis. You can do a partial transcript, GPS coordinates, and hyperlink. So if you look at Marshall Webb's interview, you can link to, from Marshall Webb, the moment of Tremensuale to the GPS coordinates. You can link to the photograph on the wall. It's a pretty neat system. I can do an index for 1/10 of the cost of a transcript. So you can imagine I'm starting to do that more and more now. It took us about 4 years to put 700 interviews online using the transcription system. In the last 6 months, we've gone through over 500 of our interviews in terms of indexing them and putting them online. Thanks to MLS, we have a grant, and we're putting the finishing touches on rolling it out to make it free and open source. But this isn't a discussion about the tool, but it's a discussion about how the tool is changing what we're doing. Oh, one small little detail about OHMS. You can upload a thesaurus of terms or multiple thesauri of terms that will auto-suggest the terms to the indexer. This is important because not all of our indexers are archivists. So you can upload Library of Congress subject headings, and it will suggest Library of Congress subject headings. One problem that, on a side note, is that in Kentucky, it's kind of an issue, the word bourbon, the whiskey, does not have a Library of Congress subject heading. So we talk a lot about advocacy. We talk a lot about... I hear a rumor that there are literally people in this room who could make that happen. I am currently on an initiative to interview all the master distillers throughout Kentucky, and I don't think I could go back without saying that I was at the Library of Congress, and I did not request. So just out of curiosity, show of hands, how many people would be in favor of a Library of Congress subject heading for bourbon? Okay. All right. That's on video. The people have spoken, right? I'm digressing, but you can upload these, and you know what? That's actually making this indexing thing really easy to do, and the quality of the product that comes back is actually extremely high because they're dealing with controlled vocabularies. So I recently did an experiment with a group of students, graduate students, library science students, and knowing full well that they didn't really like baseball, guessing, but we had a collection on 75 interviews on the desegregation of Major League Baseball, and they've been sitting on a shelf for 25 years, waiting to be fundraised for to get transcripts. It's everybody but Jackie Robinson. This is an awesome collection that in an analog world was getting global requests, still waiting for those transcripts to be funded. It was about $20,000 that I think it was going to take. Languishing on the shelf, really. And I trained my graduate students in class. They were being graded on it. And in a week and a half, those interview indexes were done. We created a thesaurus of stadium names, baseball team names, rosters of the players. What else did we put in there? Oh, the Negro League teams. That was a really important part of this. And so, because those names aren't at the tip of our tongue now in terms of seeing those on ESPN. So it was really important to give them the full range of material to tag, and they did it. We had a little cleanup, but it worked. And guess what? I got 75 interviews online. I didn't have to spend $25,000 or $20,000 on transcription. And in some ways, it's better, because somebody can talk about living under segregation for 3 hours and never once mention what word? Segregation, right? You look at that index, you know very well, you know right away that this segment is about living under segregation. So it's really transforming the way we're working. We're starting to work with project directors. Interviewers are indexing the interviews. Instead of saying, hey, can you pay to transcribe these? And then we have to have that awkward conversation. And we're like, well, no, we'll have to fundraise for your transcripts because they're not a high priority. We're indexing them while they're fresh in their mind, while they're emotionally still attached to the project, while they're doing research and need to have the ability to know what's in those interviews. It's like the old tape logs we used to do. So we were also engaging a small community county historical society of volunteers of that historical society. That historical society gave us over 200 interviews. Those volunteers, all over 65, I did awkwardly ask that, and they confirmed all over 65 are indexing their 200 interviews from the people in their community. Who better to represent a community? Not graduate students who happen to work for me, who are learning to do metadata. The community itself, and I'm telling you, the result is fantastic. So that leads me to the Oral History in a Digital Age project, because it was funded by IMLS several years ago. And it partnered Michigan State University, the American Folklife Center, and the Smithsonian. Who else was in that? AFS, American Folklore Society, and the Oral History Association. And it's an online website. I don't have a PowerPoint, so Google Oral History in a Digital Age. And it is a resource that contains over 80 articles written by experts who are from a variety of backgrounds. Who talk about collecting, curating, disseminating oral history, various aspects of it. They're tools that are empowering individuals. So tools to help you make decisions, not just throw a ton of information at you. So there is a tool on there called Ask Doug, and it's because I've been doing the audio recording workshops for 15 years that I get a lot of requests. Andy Kolovos can attest to the fact that he gets a lot of requests, too, from people who have one question: which recorder should I buy? And the answer is always, it depends. Because it used to be in the analog world, one or the other. So this tool is developed based on 21 questions that I put together that I would ask you if you picked up the phone and called me. It works a little like eharmony.com. And it has resulted in a few marriages. I'm very proud about that. But it is a new model, I think, for best practices. It's not a prescriptive white paper. It's a series of dynamic, nimble, small essays that, guess what, when something changes, they can change, right? So whether it's how to do a checksum, which I wrote a little article about how to do a checksum, a little digital preservation tool that you can use. Well, the tool has now been discontinued that I recommended. So I'm going in and probably tomorrow morning changing what tool I'm going to recommend for that. But with this kind of approach to best practices, combined with, references to the white papers, but also, I think, tools to help you make decisions, I think it really, comes around to this idea of we've heard this for 2 days, we can't do this alone, right? So we depend heavily on education and training and community empowerment to do what we do. It was always easy to train people on how to do interviewing, and they go out and do interviewing. But I think now we're starting to see a situation where in the archives, we can actually have community engagement, we can actually have productive, through education and training, productive contributions that really transform everybody's experience. So as we think about everybody here on stage, we're going to start to see these case studies of education and training that I think take things to a whole new level, and it's really exciting to see what happens. So we're going to start off, we are going to speak in the same order as demonstrated in your program. So we're going to begin with Elizabeth Call, whose birthday is today. Yes, so I am not going to call for the song, but I'm not going to stop you if you start. Elizabeth's from the Brooklyn Historical Society, and she has a new position, which I can't remember what it is because she just told me that it was a new position, but she will tell you. Emanuel Valentin is from the Free University of Bolzano, Italy, and Alexia Hudson-Ward, Penn State, Abington, just outside of Philly. Shauna Collier, Holly Smith, and Lori Harris are from UNC Chapel Hill. Apparently, vocally, they're going to be represented by one, but they're all going to speak during the Q&A, right? You better. And Cecilia Salvatore is Graduate School of Library and Information Science at Dominican University, River Forest, Illinois. So, that being said, I'm going to sit down. I want you to start thinking about your questions because this is Friday afternoon, and we were told because it's Friday afternoon that we can go over. I'm just kidding. So, thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Call. I'm from the Brooklyn Historical Society. Yes, it's my birthday. How cool to be presenting at the Library of Congress on your birthday. At any rate, I do have a new job title. We'll get to that in a second. So Brooklyn Historical Society was founded in 1863. For those of you who are familiar a little bit about Brooklyn, we're made up of a lot of neighborhoods, and we're located in the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn. The building that we're currently in, you can see it, I don't know, it's all stretched out, but on my little Prezi presentation, there's a picture of our building. And it was built in 1881, so 2 years before the opening of the Brooklyn Bridge. And it's quite an ornate building and quite impressive. So if you ever find yourself in the area, I do invite you to come and check it out. It's quite the space as well as the library. So we've been collecting since our founding in 1863, and our collections are, they document the history of Brooklyn and Long Island from European settlement in the 1600s through to modern day. And that we collect across all formats. So that includes, family papers, manuscripts, books. We have lots of family Bibles, oral histories, film, photographs, maps, etc. Objects, textiles. We really do have quite a collection that documents the history of Brooklyn and Long Island. When people ask, because inevitably anybody who comes into the library, when they ask, what do you got here? And I try to frame it in an interesting way, and I really come to start talking about our collection really about how it documents Brooklyn's infrastructure, and that can mean a lot of different things. That can mean, documenting from just one family and their involvement in living in Brooklyn to, the sewer collections that we have that document development of Brooklyn's sewer to street, pavement, you name it. So I've really been framing that answer to, talk about Brooklyn's infrastructure. Which will lead into the workshop I developed over time. So BHS, Brooklyn Historical Society, is a library and archives research library, a museum, and an educational K through 12 education center. The library's hours are slightly limited. We're only currently open Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from 1 to 5. And that's been the case since I started there 7 years ago. Luckily, we're going to be having Saturday hours in December, but the reason for the whole development of the workshop I'll be talking about grew out of our collection strength in Brooklyn's infrastructure, also the fact that we had such limited hours. So, I really wanted to be able to offer something to the public, because most people work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. I decided to start a Saturday workshop series. And because we have such a strong collection in things like maps and photos, city directories, the real sources of local history, I decided a building research workshop was what would be popular, and I was correct. And actually, I started the workshops in 2008, and they've really become something different than when I first started them out. That's a picture of a workshop going on in our library. I don't know if you can see the beauty of it, but anyway, that's a little sample of what our library looks like. So I really started seeing that actually the majority of our reference questions are around this building history and resources. So it was collection strength, demand, and the use of our collections, the fact that we had limited hours, and the fact that we really needed to get the word out that we were this amazing research library that was open to researchers and the general public, everybody. So basically the breakdown of the workshop and how it goes down, because it's really a workshop. It's not about me standing up like I am right now and just talking at you. People come in, and I always have a handout for people, which basically goes step by step, the process of doing research, building research in our library, as well as all the other resources that is available, all the other New York City repositories and libraries that might be helpful, as well as the growing number of digital resources online. So this is a packet that is constantly changing. I'm always redoing it and revising it after every new workshop. Plus, I always illustrate my talk and presentation based on a new address that I pick at random, so that my talk is a little fresh. I'm a little excited because I inevitably am able to find, or at least create, a narrative about the history of a house within just 8 hours, because I basically give myself 1 day to prepare for the workshop. So I kind of feel like, it's fresh in my head and the excitement's still there. So they get the packet, and then we walk through I walk through my sample with them, and then I really start highlighting what they're going to be doing after my talk. So I talk for maybe 20 minutes with a PowerPoint, and then we really talk about the main resources they will be using in the library during their time. And that would be fire insurance maps, as you can see on the screen. We also talk about land conveyances, which in our collection document land ownership in all of Brooklyn. We almost have every single block in Brooklyn documented. So land ownership from 1699 to about 1896 is when they tend to stop, because we consolidate with Manhattan in 1898. And then we also talk about our photograph collection, as well as we have a real estate brochure collection, as well as the city directories I was talking about. And really those primary sources, those archives, people are able to use, and they can piece together quite a significant amount of history of a building. So then after that's all highlighted, I basically let them go off. And I have assistants that help me, because I can't do it all myself. I generally have about 25, it's usually a sold out event. So about 25 participants come in, and then it's kind of messy the first 10 minutes, because everybody is geared up, has their questions, needs to be shown how to use the resources. So we always have somebody stationed in the atlases. We always have someone stationed with the conveyances, and those two people are always trained on how to show people how to use them. Anyhow, I have only 1 more minute. I didn't realize I would go over. But basically, it's been very successful. One of the major challenges I wanted to address is that I did say that was a sold-out event. We have to charge. And that's not something I generally love to do. I would love to think about ways of getting this out to grassroots groups like neighborhood associations or other nonprofit historical associations. I would also love to turn this into a K through 12 curriculum. Also try to think about ways of putting this into undergraduate instruction that we have that come into the library. But all these things take time and funding, and we don't really have that. And another thing I found out about putting a price tag to things, it makes sure that people show up. So it's really true. If I made it free a couple of times, and then you have 25 RSVPs and 5 people show up, and that's great. It's a nice small group, but it's really nice to be able to serve the 25 people that RSVP'd. So I think I'll wrap up. Thank you, everybody.
So, hello everybody. I'm Emmanuel Valentin from the University of Bolzano. And I have a bad news for you to start. I'm not an archivist. I'm a cultural anthropologist. And to do it even worse, I'm from Italy. But my mother tongue is not Italian. My mother tongue is Latin or Rheto-Roman, because I'm from a autonomous region in the north of Italy on the border to Austria, and there's a German-speaking minority and a Latin-speaking minority. And okay, today I want to present you a project we realized in the last 3 years on intangible heritage. The project had the title Italo-Swiss Ethnographies for the Valorization of Intangible Cultural Heritage. So the starting point of this project was the UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage from 2003. Thanks to this convention, we can say that actually UNESCO has discovered again what anthropologists, historians, folklorists, and other people have been doing for a long time before, but thanks to UNESCO we are back on the stage again and got into international cultural politics again. This UNESCO convention has been ratified by Italy in 2007 and by Switzerland in 2008, and actually these two countries have been collaborating in this project. I think I can skip the definition of this. What is intangible cultural heritage according to the UNESCO Convention? The ECI project was an Interreg project financed by the European Union, as I said, and it was part of the operational program between Italy and Switzerland. It had a duration from September 2009 to September 2012, and the lead partner was actually an archive. It was the Archive for Ethnography and Social History from Milan. And additionally, there were 6 partners from Italy and from Switzerland. So the main activity fields have been the identification, documentation, conservation, dissemination, and promotion of intangible cultural heritage. Of course, trying to involve and to foster the participation of the communities. Since the intangible heritage is or has to be understood as a living heritage, the documentations should serve the aim to understand evolutions and also processes of change. So there have been a series of workshops which have been dedicated to audio and video techniques and of documentation of some specific categories of intangible heritage. Not all of our collaborators have been anthropologists or have been trained in doing field work or doing qualitative research. So one of the aim was to get them also a little bit into the field. And one of the main outcome what I would like to present you today is the intangible search, which is an internet-based inventory of intangible heritage. I will show you some screenshots of this inventory, and I hope you can read them a little bit at least. This is the home screen, the top of the home screen, from where you can just search the inventory. So, for example, there is a list in order to show the documentations contained in this inventory. We have produced in 3 years like 250 documentations. I think this number does not sound great to archivists if you are talking about millions of pages and thousands of documents or whatever. But when you think about qualitative documentation or qualitative research, it's quite a lot of documentations which have been created. So you can show the various documentations also as a map. This is based on a Google map with various items, with various dots. On the right side, you can also see like where we are located, like in the border area between Switzerland and Italy, in the Alpine region. So if you click on these various dots, you can have a first detailed view of the single items, and you have the possibility also to get in the item to have more details about this documentation. So on the home screen, of course, we have a search and a tag area, and we have also some persons represented by portraits, like in order to underline also the people who participated actively in this documentation. And there is one area for giving also suggestions. So for the aim, of course, is to give the possibility to participate and to give suggestions on which intangible heritage is existing additionally to what has been documented so far. Okay, if we browse the inventory and go into the rituals, for example, this has been the main part, or most of the documentations done have been identified as rituals or festive events. Then, of course, you can see, first of all, the list of all the rituals. And if you click on one of it, you get a first overview card of that particular ritual, where you have also the possibility to choose the language. So far, not all the documents have been translated in 5 languages, but some of them are, and it's still a work in progress. Actually, besides Italian, French, German, and English, we have also the Latin language. So I'm very proud of that, because I was working for a Latin museum in doing this research. Okay, and this is actually the detail card of the ritual. We see on the top a gallery with some multimedia files. You can see videos, photographs, audio records. Beneath of that, and underlining also the dynamic aspect of this intangible heritage, is a timeline which makes it possible to show different documents according to their year of production. There is a description, of course, again, the choice of languages, some bibliography. You have on the left side, you have like a spatial and temporal location with a small map, and also when the festivity is taking place, of course, the author and the date of publication, and the possibility to link them up to some social networks. Of course, the list of participants, of the informants or the experts, as we call them, and other sections of textual description. So the primary aim of the ECHE project is not the presentation of candidatures for the insertion in the UNESCO list. And we have to think, okay, this was a first step towards the participation of communities in the research, but I think we have to do a lot more when to foster this approach. And I had a very good input in these days. But I think the discussion is still going on, and we have to think about innovative forms. Especially, we have to promote indigenous definitions of heritage. We cannot impose from an external view what is heritage and what are the categories of heritage. We have to listen to the people, what they are actually seeing as their heritage. Of course, if the heritageization process is an expression of power, we have to promote a sharing of responsibility for the management of the heritage between institutions and the civil society. And if we speak about collaboration, then even a standardized tool as the database behind the online inventory of ECI has been, then we cannot guarantee a standardization of the documentation results, since qualitative research has always a very subjective result, and yeah, it's very different how the people use actually or insert the data into this. The documentation for the sake of conservation, of course, but we have to focus on updates and change. The timeline has been a first step, but I think we can do even more in underlining this part. Okay, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am so thrilled and honored to be here, and I appreciate all of you staying and hanging out at such a late hour with us this afternoon. I will share with you, I'm okay with outing myself. I'm a reference and instruction librarian at one of Penn State's campuses, but my other job in the other 24 hours that I have to dedicate to this type of work, I'm a volunteer archivist with an organization named the Links Incorporated. The Links Incorporated is a predominantly Black women's volunteer social and civic organization founded in Philadelphia in 1946, organized by two women who brought 7 others together to really address the economic and social conditions of African Americans during that time period. It's interesting, however, is that even in 1946, the organization was international in scope, and so the idea of having a link, if you will, and the symbol of the organization is a globe with a chain link around it, was to not only symbolize a chain of friendship, but also a purposeful chain of service. And so it's quite interesting. Today, the organization has 276 chapters in 41 states, the District of Columbia, and also the Bahamas, with 12,000 members. The Links hold NGO status in the United Nations and has partnerships with various civil rights organizations, including the NAACP. Members of the Links Incorporated contribute more than 500,000 documented community service hours annually and have contributed more than $25 million to various nonprofit organizations since 1979. Within its membership ranks are some of our country and actually internationally, professionally and politically influential Black women, including 6 members of Congress, several HBCU presidents, and Dr. Condoleezza Rice will be inducted as an honorary member next week. And she will be joining another recent honorary inductee, the president of Liberia, Dr. Ellen Johnson Shirley. And so what I'm going to do today is walk you through some additional background information about my work as it relates to being the Eastern Area Archivist for the Links Incorporated, and just kind of giving you that little bit of background. You can imagine that the data level is enormous. This may be a little challenging to see, but this is some of our organizational milestones regarding archives and history. The role of the National Historian, and then it later became the National Archivist and Historian, was established just 3 years after the organization's founding. The organization decentralized in the 1950s, and so then the role of the area archivist, and again, this is a volunteer organization, was developed when the Links Incorporated decentralized. Howard University serves as our national repository, and the eastern area of the Links Incorporated, we have a repository at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. This relationship was established in 1999. However, it wasn't until 2007 that the organization's first archival and history standards guide that was actually written and geared towards the general membership and the chapters was published. The second guide was published in 2011. The 4th edition history book of the Links Incorporated is scheduled for release in April of 2014. And so this history book project really was the catalyst of the clarion call, if you will, towards action with the general membership and making sure that our cultural heritage records management was really happening at the level that it should be happening. This particular history book will be the first book that attempts to capture the organization's history at the local level. Again, this may be a little challenging to see, and I apologize for it, but it's kind of the scope of my other 24-hour job that I do with this organization. As you can see, the charge is rather voluminous, and when we think about this in the context of a volunteer organization, busy women who are leaders in their respective professions and communities, imagine me trying to call up 73 volunteer chapter archivists and say, I need you to work with me on developing both the narrative of what you're doing at the local level and also your records management. You can imagine I had lots and lots of fun. And I need it next week. And so really my approach was trying to think of something quick and catchy and meaningful to get the majority of the chapters onboarded with this process and also wouldn't be lost in translations through a series of conversations with a variety of different people. So I came up with this equation idea. And this was really about moving towards volunteer member engagement. And so it was purpose plus partnership plus participation equals perpetuity. And so they got it. They were like, okay, I think I understand that. Like, I get it. Okay, so we're no pun intended, we're linked in purpose. We have a partnership, we need participation, and there'll be perpetuity. So I bumped it out a little further and actually kind of walk them through what I meant, because I didn't want this to kind of be lost in interpretation. And so the purpose was really the vision statement that everyone needed to be committed to this work and to embrace it, and that it was really about having all of the Eastern Area Links members understand and cherish the important role that our archives and history contributes to Black women's history, and also to embrace our personal stake in managing our precious historical assets. In terms of partnerships, I consistently shared with folks the necessity of leveraging the talent of the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, who have just been incredible, incredible partners, and also to access me, and they enjoy doing that on a regular basis. That's in my other 24 hours. So we make sure that we emphasize this open door educational policy. In terms of participation, all of the chapters are strongly encouraged to submit annual reports to me. They're actually called Legacy Keepers documents. In the Dropbox, you can actually see our full archivals guide, and you can download it at your leisure. And there is an incentive in terms of this reporting, is that in the even number of years where we gather as a national organization for conferences, one's chapter could win an award at the area and national level. So it gets to kind of be really competitive and cool. But I also talked to them about the high touch and high tech philosophy of cultural heritage records management. And so I try not to geek them out with a lot of librarian lingo, but I do spend a lot of time on the telephone talking to them. I've also spent a lot of time doing hands-on sessions as it relates to cloud computing with the chapter archivist, and I did a lot of relationship building. I spent a lot of time traveling to different chapters, meeting with different chapter archivists and chapter presidents to emphasize the necessity that we really needed to focus on this in a really high-level way. And in perpetuity, I'll be really blunt, I appealed to their egos. As my undergraduates say about people who are influential, you have ballers, shot callers, and bosses. So that's what the links are. And so what I said to them is that, you do all this amazing community service work, right? And, you're leaders in the community. And so you're making history on a regular basis. So don't you want the legacy of your work to live forever? And you should have seen the eyes light up. It was great. And boy, did I get a lot of their attention as well. And so that's really the core of this work, was trying to link through purpose, through partnership and participation, to ensure that our story as a major contributing entity to American history lives in perpetuity. And I'm pleased to share with you that we have been able to successfully move adoption of these new standards from 20% to 60% of the chapters in the area for over the past 2 years. And so without question, the 2014 history book was a catalyst to getting everybody kind of into that, because the perpetuity piece played into it. They want to live forever and they wanted to be represented in the history book. But there were definitely seeds planted in terms of making sure that our cultural heritage legacy was done in an appropriate way. So thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Shauna Collier, and technically I'm not an archivist. I have some best friends who are archivists. It seems like a large part of my job is working with archival collections, and I've been known to rub up against a Hollinger box or two. I'm here today with two of my colleagues, Holly Smith and Lori Harris, and we are members of a group called Project Right Now Carolinas. So we are a group of archivists, librarians, public historians, and students, and we volunteer our services to help educate African American communities, individuals, and organizations, if need be, about best archival practices. We also act as advocates or consultants when needed. The idea for the group came about at the 2011 Society of North Carolina Archivists annual meeting that some of the now PRNC members attended. And I understand there was a discussion there about the need to educate African American communities about preserving and perhaps donating their materials if they so desired. I was not at that meeting, but my colleague Holly Smith was, and a few months later, when PRNC decided to come together, she invited me to the first meeting. A few months later, Lori came to UNC as a student, MLS student, and we dragged her in too, so not kicking and screaming though. So when we first met, we talked about our mission, what we were there to do. We came up with our name, and I can go into that later if someone wants to know, and just ironed out some of the details. We started out with about 12 members, and we now have 7 active members, and we're not all at UNC. We're at different institutions, kind of across North Carolina, but mostly in the Triad area. Today I'd like to describe just briefly 3 of the projects that we've worked on. The first was actually a presentation that we did in the fall of 2011. This was to St. Paul AME Church, Chapel Hill's oldest African American church. The church is planning to have a library and archive when they move to their new location in a few years. And so we were there to do a presentation about the preservation of historical documents and church history. And we were there at the invitation of one of the UNC history professors, Dr. Reginald Hildebrand. This is his church. Our second project was the Russell School Oral History Project, and that's actually still kind of going on. The Russell School is a former Rosenwald school. It's in Durham. We kicked off this project in early 2012, and we conducted the interviews in the spring and summer of 2012. Most of the interviews took place at Cain's Chapel Baptist Church, which sits on the same property as the school building. The church actually purchased the school when it closed in 1945. Most of the interviewees or former students are in their 80s on average. A few were in their 90s. And we ended up interviewing about 11 former students and about 8 of the board members. So the second part of this project that, to our surprise, was creating a documentary for the Russell School Board and for the Friends Group. And this was actually done as an independent study by 3 students from UNC School of Journalism, thank goodness. And we're still working on this documentary, but in a minute I'd like to show you like a 30-second clip of what they created. We plan to expand it into a longer documentary eventually, and this is a rough cut, and so there's some errors and things we need to look over and correct. So one of our most recent projects this year has been working with the nonprofit workers' rights advocacy organization in Raleigh, North Carolina, called Black Workers for Justice. We've been working with their director, Angaza Laughinghouse, love that name, acting as a consultant for his personal papers that he's collected about the organization over the years. He is thinking of having an on-site archive or maybe eventually donating his papers, and so we've just been providing guidance on that. So these are just a few of our projects. We definitely plan to do more. We're always getting requests that we're vetting, so now I'm gonna zip through the rest of the slides. So this was the presentation at St. Paul. That's Dr. Hildebrand there, looking happy. The Russell School. Just some information about what the Rosenwald School was, the building program. By the way, North Carolina has bragging rights. We ended up with more Rosenwald schools than any other state, over 800. Information about the Russell School in particular. This is the school building. It's actually in pretty good shape considering. This was our kickoff day. We went out and did test interviews, also toured the school building. It was a two-teacher type school, which was common for schools, Rosenwald schools built at that time. A few months later, we started the interviews with the former students. These are some of the PRNC members here. We also documented photographs and artifacts when we could. This was a couple, they're in their 90s. They met at the Russell School, the Coopers. This is one of the former students. She's also a board member for the Russell School. So these are the students. This is the second part of the project from UNC, interviewing some of the board members. By the way, the reason I said thank God, because initially we kept calling it the Oral History Project, because we are librarians, archivists, and whatnot. And the board members kept calling it the documentary. And we kept thinking, documentary? We don't know anything about documentaries. Thank God the School of Journalism. One of the last people that the UNC students interviewed was Helen Rosenwald Stahl. She's a descendant of the Rosenwald family, and she was just a delight to interview. This was a meeting we had there on the right with Black Workers for Justice. That's Angaza over in the corner and their logo. Thank you for your time today. By the way, has anyone guessed who the archivist is on the panel?
Okay, just a little background. You all know from the program, my name is Cecilia Salvatore, but I am from the Micronesian Islands. I'm from Saipan. For those of you who don't know Micronesia, it consists of, or consisted, it's broken up right now, but Republic of Palau, Pohnpei, Marshall Islands, Yap, Chuuk. I grew up on Saipan. I always wanted to work with cultural heritage materials, and so when I enrolled in the archives program at the University of Texas, Austin, I knew that I wanted to work to preserve cultural heritage materials. But when I was there, and this was several years ago, I wanted to do a dissertation on documenting cultural heritage communities, on documenting intangible cultural heritage materials related to Micronesia. But at that time, my advisor believed in this notion that you don't collect for archives, you wait for things to come to you. And so he insisted that I focus on the archives that are there right now, which really were the naval archives, and they consisted of, naval wives, what they were doing, and if there was any story about the Chamorros, and I'm a Chamorro, it was about what they did as reported in a police blotter. So I didn't want to do that kind of research, but anyways, I did get my PhD, but I focused more on librarianship as a dissertation, because at that point, this paradigm shift hadn't happened. But now that I'm teaching archives, and previous to coming to Dominican University, I was teaching archives at Emporia State for 10 years. Then I came to Dominican in 2009, and I was asked to grow the program. And so I decided to insert, instead of an archival studies, to insert archives and cultural heritage resources management. So our students now get a specialization in archives and cultural heritage resources management. So when on the program for this symposium, it says value, Value and Power of Developing Cultural Heritage Archives was on the program. And I want to say that I was into cultural heritage archives before cultural heritage archives was cool. So what do I do with teaching archival studies in a library and information science curriculum? When I was asked to develop the program, what I decided to do with one other colleague, and there were only two of us, was to have this symposium, and it was Archives, Cultural Heritage, Chicago. And what we decided to do was to reach out to community archives, to cultural heritage archives. This wasn't a symposium where, we had people telling, we did have a couple of speakers. We had Mark Green, who developed MPLP, those of you who are archivists, and also Juliana Richardson of the History Makers. So we had them come and talk, but we also had panelists from the different community archives come in and talk about their collection. And the purpose of this was to really hear about what was it that they wanted us, how it was it that they wanted us to help them. How could we work with them? So we reached out to various community archives. And as you know, Chicago, being a diverse community, we had representatives from the Hellenic Museum, from the Creation Museum, from the Turkish Cultural Center, from various communities. And they came and basically they said, we needed help. They were understaffed. But we started with this. And we realized that if we are going to develop this program and teach cultural heritage, we had some issues. We had some challenges. Now, you may have experienced, other people may have experienced different situations, but this was our experience. Students, want to come in and get a professional education. They want to get jobs, so they want to be trained in EAD. They want to learn about content DM. They want to learn about EAC CPF. They want to learn how to use Omeka and all that stuff. They want to do technology. And so we need to pay attention to that. Students want to be exposed to vast resources and technology. So for them, a practical experience would be working in the Newberry, working in the Chicago History Museum, working in the Field Museum. These places that had resources. However, from our symposium, we had cultural heritage archives. We had people who basically said, we have these resources, they're in the basement, we want to take care of them now. So how do we work with that? The other issue with the education is that, we want to emphasize that there are archives, and then there are cultural heritage archives, and there are community archives, even though members of these communities don't necessarily call them that. There are historical societies, cultural center, and so I had to make sure that I explained that situation to them. So we had the challenge of, placing students in a practical experience in an archives when it really wasn't an archives. And that was something that I had to deal with because there was also a pressure from the curriculum. Students want practical experiences, but there are practicum requirements. And one of the requirements is that you have to have a professional working in the practicum site. You have to have somebody with an MLS. And for years, it had to be somebody with a master's in library science. I changed that to say it can be a master's in any other field. It could be a master's in folklore. It can be a master's in history or something else. So I was able to change that. But that was the challenge, is that how do you place people in these community archives when they are understaffed and they don't necessarily have that kind of background. Also, these cultural heritage archives have diverse materials, and so how do you deal with very delicate ethical materials, for example? Language requirements. We get requests from, the last time, for example, when we had a request from somebody from the Croatian Cultural Center who said, we would like somebody who speaks Croatian. And I can't guarantee that one of our students speak that language, but they want to work with you, and they promise, they would say, we'll bring in a couple of people to whenever you want to come in, and we will be able to translate it for you. But again, that was a challenge. There was also the issue of cultural heritage boundaries, and I think we don't, that I don't think people talk, we talk about collaboration, but the reality of it is that there are boundaries. So for example, we can have somebody who's from, who wants to put together a Lithuanian archives, and when you suggest that, well, you know, there is already the Balzikas Lithuanian archives or museum, would you like to work with them? People have their own ideas about what they want to do with their collection. So you have to be sensitive to those things. So what are the guidelines then for teaching cultural heritage curators? The Society of American Archivists has guidelines for graduate education in archives. And I do refer to this because even though the traditional archival education is appraisal, selection, and arrangement and description, all that, there are also other issues such as social and cultural systems, and I do bring that into my discussion. The research design, for example, in education, history research. So I bring all those things in there. So there is, you know, right now, I certainly refer to resources from the American Folklife Center, from all these other places, but I do go to this as well because they want to become archivists, and I say, you know, what I'm talking about does matter because it is mentioned in the graduate professional education. So what I was able to do, which I'm very thankful for my university for wanting me to do this, I basically said I want to introduce a class called Cultural Heritage Resources Management. And I'll give you a little description of what that is. I have to just say this, that I think that even though people were convinced that they could change it to cultural heritage, I think people still think, or people thought anyways, that I was talking about cultural institutions, meaning these big museums and not necessarily these small community archives. So the cultural heritage resources management course, what I have the students do is, first of all, I want them to basically look at the different descriptions of cultural heritage. And Emmanuel mentioned having people define heritage. So I have my students look into that. You know, what you may think is cultural heritage may not be cultural heritage for another community. I also have them analyze and describe communities, and I actually have them talk about or learn about ethnographic tools and other kinds of tools. Then I talk about the different cultural heritage components, things that don't happen in a typical archival class. What are some of the landscapes and spaces? What are the foodways? What are the beliefs and religions? What is intangible versus tangible cultural heritage? So you see my background from the South Pacific really applies to this because these things are very relevant to me. Then we talk about archival principles and practices in the context of different cultural heritage institutions. We talk about the tools and methodologies because that's what they want to work with. You know, they want to work with Omeka, and so we say, okay, this is how you would put an exhibit using them, and so we do all these things as well, but not before they learn how to analyze communities, understand cultural heritage, and basically unpack that whole notion there. And then they come up with a proposal of how they can help these communities. That's the first class. The second class is an archives cultural heritage fieldwork, where we actually focused on a specific project. Both classes are still brand new, but we've worked with a couple of institutions right now. And the one thing about the focused field study is that we go to these different places and we say, what is it that you want us to do? We allow for flexibility, and this is very important in working with communities, is that you may plan, you may have this idea that you're going to work on a project this semester. It may not necessarily happen the way you want it. You have to allow for working on a project all the way up to maybe up to the third semester. And then instructor availability. Because these places don't have a professional archivist working with them, then that means that I have to be there with the students every time they go there. So it means that I drive around to all these different places. And then we collaborate in terms of providing them with archival training for things that they need, and even come up in some cases with a manual that's relevant to the work that they are doing. And so I'll just give you a quick, I can't see, okay, time. Can I just show you one thing? Okay, one thing, just one thing. So here's an example, and again, these are communities that, this is an opportunity for students to really go out there and work with the community. So we had one community where their main goal, again, we have to ask them what is it that they want us to do. Their main goal is to identify the gravestones in their community. This is actually a village, but it's still a cultural heritage community. And so one of the things we did was we took a tour of the cemeteries. And can anybody guess where this is? Haymarket Monument. It's a Forest Park, Illinois, where there are, truthfully, there are about 300 cemeteries, and most of them are Jewish cemeteries, different synagogues. But we went and we took a tour, and then the part about methodologies includes historical research. So that definitely is part of the work that they do, is that they have to go and conduct research for the needs of the community. Thank you.
We have a wide range of topics, so let's open the floor. We have the microphones in place. Oh, wait, are there any questions?
Hi, I wanted to ask a question of the people that are working on, let me hope I get it right, project right now. Yeah? Yay, right now. And it actually probably applies to some of the others people. Could you ever imagine someone coming to you with a project that you just didn't want to do? Yes. Not because you didn't have time, not because it wasn't this, but like it was crazy, or it was, I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to, this is what is, it just struck me like, wow, there's times where you just don't want to go diving into something.
Can you give an example?
Well,
crazy is as crazy does.
No, I know. I don't know.
Well,
it could offend you politically, or, it could not fit what you were originally thinking you were going to be doing. It could be, and really, I'm opening this up to all of you. I just wonder about that. Like, when you're serving the community, you don't always know what the community might bring to you.
I can give you an example really quick. When I was doing the research for the plenary, I kept running across an article written by Frank Bowles where he took in the papers of the Ku Klux Klan of northern Michigan. And there was a lot of hue and cry about whether he should take that set of papers or not. What if the Knights of the White Camellia came and said, we want you, we need your help to preserve our materials, or I don't know, Louis Farrakhan, for example. I'm trying to pick both sides, but what would,
I see what you mean. Yep. Yeah, thank you. The good thing I think about us, and I think my colleagues here will agree, is that we volunteer our services. We, have our full-time jobs as librarians, archivists, professors, whatever. But what we do for PRNC is our time. It's our volunteer time that we do outside of work. We don't necessarily try to encourage anyone to place their materials with any one particular institution. If they're thinking that way, we can provide that guidance, kind of that expertise. But we can say no. Or we could say politely, that is outside of our scope.
And that is the good thing about, like you said, volunteer, like, I'm sorry, we just don't have time. But to kind of address the point Dana brought up in terms of, contested archival history, or, things that we might find personally unpleasant. Surprise, surprise, I'm the archivist, boom. Or I should say we all are. But I worked in the Southern Historical Collection at UNC for a long time. And
I personally don't think that it's my job. I think, you know, being socially engaged as an archivist is my responsibility, and it's not my job to pick and choose the history, which I deem pleasant, because, so we have things related to the Ku Klux Klan, as of course, in the that's Southern history. My fear would be if that was to try to be whitewashed out of archives or disregarded, then history could come and be like, well, people didn't have it so bad. The KKK wasn't that bad, which is erroneous in history. So I think just kind of speaking arcally from our perspective as professionals in the, you know, I have my personal opinion, but in terms of, you know, so if somebody ever, I guess, approach me, if the Grand Dragon just ever happened to come across me in Starbucks and wanted my help, I would, you know, I would disagree with you politically and ideologically, but sure, this is what you do with your materials. but I mean, I can tell you a couple of places, like you said, yeah, you know that's right, where you can put it. Sorry. But in all seriousness, again, like, you know, just believe me, I'm sorry, in an encompassing picture, I don't think it's our job to pick and choose what's pleasant, because there are many contested histories, but that need to be fully discussed. Exactly, yes.
More questions?
I guess I'll come over here so you guys can kind of see me. So you all work with a wide range of people, users, students, the people holding the materials. What are some common misconceptions that you run across? And then any topics that you feel like we don't have the answers for yet?
In terms of common misperceptions, I think is that every physical piece of material matters. And in particular, in the case of a volunteer organization of very prominent women, they think that everything matters. And so everything matters. Nothing should be weeded or thrown out. And then I'm sorry, the second part of your question was around what are the kind of gaps or things that we should be working on? Yes. Okay. I can share in terms of, and I know the ladies over here and the other panelists can probably illuminate this as well. One of the biggest challenges I'm facing is trying to figure out how to capture materials such as quilts and quilt squares, how to capture dolls and poster art material, because in fact, the Links Incorporated gives a lot of money to a national visual literacy project where children all across the country develop posters that communicate a healthy lifestyle, and the grand prize is something like $5,000. And so we have literally in our repository now probably thousands of pieces of these beautiful artwork material that was hand created by children. How do we archive that, digitize it, and then capture it and make it searchable?
Was your question, was the question about working with student populations as well? All of them. Oh, okay. Well, I was going to speak to students in particular. One of the reasons we created PRNC was not just to educate communities, but also it was a way of us giving back to communities, the information professionals, and also we wanted to involve students to help them gain that experience to determine what may be valuable and what you might leave kind of on the shelf, so to speak. So our involvement with students has been along those lines of helping them to gain experience. And I'm going to pass it to Lori, who is a student.
So as a student, I've had the honor and the privilege to work with these two wonderful women. And for me, it was just really amazing to sort of have my own history kind of come into play. Growing up, my grandfather used to say, when people invite you into their homes and they share with you their life stories, it's important that you leave something on the table. And working with these women, especially doing the oral history project with the older men and women in the community, you come into their world, you come into their lives. And for me, it just clicked that they, you know, older people kind of want to get to know who you are. You know, what's your story? And then they start to share. And just sitting there having that opportunity, it was like, this is what Dad was talking about. You've got to leave something on the table. You've got to, and I think sitting here today, talking and hearing about collaboration and humility, that's what all of us do. We hopefully leave something at the table, and we gain so much more from that. And as a student, I've gained like so much from these women in here today as well.
Well said. Well said. Do we have time for one more? One more question.
Alexia, yes, I was intrigued by your comment about the common misconception that everything matters, and how do you all deal with teaching discernment or teaching and weighing those decisions of not everything does need to be kept or put in an archive or not, and how do you negotiate that?
It's actually rather challenging because in the context of a volunteer organization, the strategy changes every 4 years. So every 4 years, there's a new president of the United States. Every 4 years, there's a new national president of the Links Incorporated. Every 4 years, there's a new area director of the Links Incorporated. And so subsequently, things shift. And so that's one of the things that currently the National Archives and History Committee of the Links Incorporated is really trying to etch in stone is some really clear standards around linking back, no pun intended, but linking back to the core mission of the organization. We are very good at the posy-wozy. So we have all these like great pictures of us posing in gala outfits. Well, okay. Not necessarily connecting back to the educational mission and focus of the organization. And so that's really where the constant conversation, and as I had mentioned in my presentation, a kind of high-touch piece, is to really kind of talk some people off the ledge around, I don't need 500 pictures of the gala. I just need 50 pictures of the community service project. And so that's really what it's about for us.
And I'm sorry, just to toss in, I think that's a great question. When we're talking to whether it's an individual or organization or, you know, at the university, we're not trying to make value judgments and saying, well, that's not important, because we tell people, you know, sometimes they say, well, what's important? It's like, what's important to you in the context of your community? But also, you know, in terms of educating people, and not to be funny, you know, you see a box of canceled check stubs. You might not need to keep that unless there's a bigger story or whatever, or maybe keep a few representatives. And so generally just kind of having that open conversation, like you said, from our perspective, because, and back to the question the other young lady asked, sometimes people, if you're not a trained professional archivist, you haven't had the experience, there's no reason you should know anything about Hollinger boxes or procedure or cataloging. And like Shauna said, that's what we're here to do, to collaborate, to assist where we can be useful, not to come in and tell you, don't you laminate that, idiot, you're doing it wrong. You know, because, yeah, boy, that'll be great, you know. So it's just about having an open, honest conversation, again, you know, womp womp, you know, as everybody hangs their head in shame and runs home and cries. But in all seriousness, just having those good, you know, open value conversations and not making people feel for something they don't need to, you know, and again, like I think Lori put it really beautifully, learning something and gleaning, so you can come in and learn how you can be an asset and have those good conversations where it can be a fruitful, beneficial, particularly beneficial to the, you know, people.
And may I just add one other piece too, is that quite frankly, I also share with them the necessity of, in the context of narrative and telling a story, it has to be fundable. So your gala is not fundable, but your community service project, your visual literacy activities probably are. Your health initiatives are. And so it really is about framing the story in the context of, what does this organization contribute from a community service perspective? We can admire ourselves in the mirror at another time.
And I can tell of a situation where we worked with some materials, and our proposal really was that they could get rid of perhaps half of the materials that they had. But we presented it to them, and we just said, you know, under archival principles, you probably wouldn't keep all of these. They ended up keeping many of them, and what they ended up doing was they used a lot for programming, for other things. And what I did was the next semester I brought another group of students back, and I said, this is what happens when you don't necessarily follow entirely archival principles, and you allow people to use it in different ways. So that happened with one community where, again, we just felt they had newspaper clippings and copies of clippings and copies of clippings, and we again, our suggestion was you don't really have that many archival materials here, but they did all kinds of things with it, and it was good for me to bring back my students and say, look at what they did with these. So.
And I would like to add that I have the advantage as a research librarian. When I'm looking at archival collections, I'm looking at them through the lens of what researchers might want to see, and so that's been extremely helpful for me. Sometimes it's a guessing game, but for the most part, I've been dead on. Thank goodness.
Okay, we're going to transition now, so thank you very much.
Apparently I need no introduction. I'm Nicole Saylor, head of the archive, and I have the dubious task of standing between you and the weekend. So my apologies in advance. All right, I've been asked to provide a few closing comments, so please indulge me for just a few minutes. So when people, led by their curiosity and a sense of openness, seek to engage one another and learn, be it a folklorist in the field or a gathering such as this, it can often lead to some of the most stimulating and meaningful experiences one can have professionally or even personally. This symposium has been particularly meaningful for me because of the expansive ideas and perspectives that participants have brought to the floor. What unfolded here is such a recognition that we're all cultural workers of a sort who are interested in each other's stories and viewpoints, and that we're genuinely eager for more radical collaborations across professional and disciplinary boundaries. This observation isn't particularly new, I know. You can see this cross-disciplinary sharing being cultivated in various corners. I'm reminded of the Digital Library Federation and how they have a program to cross-pollinate at the Electronic Resource Library Conference. And so it's travel money that is given to people who wouldn't identify themselves as such, but they can imagine a connection to their work. And so, so initiatives like that, symposiums like this, reminds us that inviting outsiders into your tribe is as important as identifying your tribe in the first place, as Michael from Penn State notes. What has been particularly inspiring for me, and I'm not tooting my own horn because this framing and curation of the symposium was well underway before I got here about 10 months ago, but it's that all of you out there self-selected to come to something vaguely titled Cultural Heritage Archives, Networks, Innovations, and Collaborations, an intentionally vague title, and for whatever reason you guys took a chance and showed up, so yay for us. But your positive and engaged participation displayed a healthy level of ambiguity tolerance, and insofar as I understand that term, it's the ability to perceive, hold on, let me get the quote. Yeah, so it's the ability to perceive ambiguity in information and behavior in a neutral and open way. But it's correlated with creativity, psychological resilience, and all kinds of really awesome things. So in other words, it's, what do epic stories have to do with federal digitization guidelines, have to do with biopiracy? Anyway, you all hung in there, and I think that's fantastic. And so I appreciate that, and I appreciate that, archivists and librarians don't get a lot of credit for having that kind of worldview. The stereotype is that we all got into this business because we're all about bringing order to chaos, and so to sort of hang with the loose threads of this conference is fabulous, and certainly affirmation of what I already know about folks around here. Of course, the symposium wasn't all handshakes and hipness, and we were reminded that we find ourselves up against the challenges that come from the work of transforming knowledge into cultural objects, sometimes they're digital, and our attempts to provide access can be viewed on some continuum between a triumph in equalizing access to something akin to fracking, I think, letting cultural knowledge seep out and do some serious harm, or as Sita put it, heritage played at extremely high stakes. She also reminds us to tread attentively, responsibly, tentatively, and ethically, and I appreciate that. So we're reminded that an approach to this work is monumentally more complicated than just sitting on a side of being the guardian or being the evangelist. And I appreciate Joel's overarching suggestion that we operate under an ethos of stewardship when navigating these spaces. At the same time, it's very heartening to see things like the TK licensing projects that arise as a practical and productive attempt to find a balance and to mind the gap. Sita gave me a lot of good material here. Finally, I heard various references to vertical and horizontal, all different directions, partnerships, and I love this expansion of alliances in all directions. It's just wonderful. Of course, it was especially cool to hear Dana at SAA talk about the value of accidental archivists, and I appreciate her work and SAA's continuing work to open that door much wider. And it's such an important organization that's just a powerful message to receive here. So as for next steps, that will require more ambiguity tolerance on our parts. This conference was not about mobilizing for action or we're from the government and we're here to help. It was about sharing ideas and making connections and prizing distributed knowledge and distributed leadership. So at AFC, we most certainly want to continue hearing from people and figuring out how we can play an important role in all of this, what resources we can bring, how we can help even. And as you go home to mull this over, we want you to feel free to be back in touch with us. If we have your email or registration info, we'll certainly be in touch with you after the fact. Anyway, many thanks, and may we all go forward farther together. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.